Hello everyone, I am back with my 2-month update video. This video will follow a similar format to the last one. So first I'm going to start by talking about how much time I spent studying and then move on to describing my current ability. After that I'll discuss YouTube and flashcards again and then quickly talk about minimal pairs and dictionaries before moving on to what may be the most important part of this video, my struggles with motivation and doubt this month. So first, my study time. In the past 31 days, I spent 18 days studying for at least 3 hours, 4 days studying for at least 2 hours, 3 days studying for at least 1 hour, and 6 days studying for around 30 minutes. In total, I spent about 73 hours studying Vietnamese this month. For comparison, I studied about 71 hours last month. I was really hoping to total above 80 hours, so even though I studied more than last month, I'm a little bit disappointed. I realized that I need to be a little bit more deliberate about allocating my time to studying, or allocating time to studying. Diligence and the ability to accomplish long-term goals are skills in and of themselves, separate from but important to learning languages. So I'm as average as anyone else when it comes to those skills, so cultivating them will be an important part of my journey and thus an important part of these videos. So of the 73 hours that I did study, about 53 of them were spent on YouTube, 11 on flashcards, 4 on minimal pairs, and 5 on other things. Of course those numbers aren't exact, they're just my best approximations, but I think they're pretty close. So after 62 days, surprise, surprise, I'm not fluent yet. The improvements that I've made are relatively subtle, especially compared to the first month. I want to talk more about that later, but for now, my current ability as of day 62. I can decipher being the key word, clear learner type audio, sometimes immediately, sometimes it takes me a few listens. But for instance, this is a cat. This morning I read the newspaper. Hello, Mr. Smith, how are you doing today? Those kind of basic learner type audio things. But yeah, real native speech is still mostly, I can't really understand it. I do hear words more often than I did 30 days ago, and I can hear full or nearly full sentences every now and then. Especially towards the end of the month. The first full sentence I heard was on, I think, day 52. So perhaps the reason I can understand learner-focused audio better is maybe the vocabulary is just more limited than what you get in native speech. But yeah, I estimate my passive vocabulary to be around 500 words based upon my flashcards and what I hear in videos. So these are words that I can understand, but I can't necessarily recall them. Just from memory. But also I've started to be able to fairly reliably tell the difference between most vowel and consonant sounds, though some are still harder than others. For instance, U and U hook, E and E hat, A and A cup, T and TH are the ones that personally I have the most trouble with. But they have been getting better. Tones haven't really had any major changes since last month. It was exciting and very noticeable to go from not being able to hear them to being able to hear them in the first month. But the more I listen, the more I realize how far I have to go. The most difficult tones for me are the rising tone when it ends in P, T, or C, and the question tone. So the rising tone that ends in P, T, or C, it ends really abruptly, and to me, it kind of it sounds like a grave tone because it just ends so quickly. Especially a grave tone that ends in the same letters. For instance, like dot versus dok, which of course my pronunciation I'm sure is terrible. But anyway, yeah, those words, I tend to hear the rising tone as the grave tone, but not the opposite. The other one is the question tone. To me, it sounds similar to multiple other tones. So I often mistake it for a falling tone or a broken tone or a grave tone. And then reading. I can read the words I know. I just don't know that many words. Like I said, I think it's around 500 words. So really my reading ability is about the same as last month. So my pronunciation. see how this goes. First, I will try to say the time. So, bây giờ là 4 giờ 10 phút. I can't pronounce it right. Anyway, so apple, táo, thank you, cảm ơn, to sit, ngồi, to read, đọc, to be able to speak English, biết nói tiếng Anh, mango, xoài, and now I'm going to try to count to 10. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, anyway, so hopefully that is enlightening as to my current ability. So to say these words, I'm like recalling instances that I've heard them in my head, like replaying that, and then I'm trying to imitate my like memory of the word. But anyway, yeah, hopefully that was enlightening. So moving on, YouTube. I am still watching Hoa Ban Food. I like the channel. I find it really entertaining. Honestly, I'm trying to like watch every video on the channel. It's kind of like a mini goal. But yeah, still watching that. One thought that I've had as I continue to watch is that even though it's hard, I think it's important to try and focus on what you're watching, especially the words that are being said. And that sounds obvious until you start watching 100 hours of video that you can't understand. And so that's part of why it's really important to search really hard for something, for content that you enjoy. But even so, I think learning to pay attention to the video and learning to pay attention to the words as people say them is a skill that you have to cultivate little by little. And it's a skill that I'm currently working on. Moving on to flashcards. I have, I think, a lot to say about flashcards this month. So again, I'm using a program called Anki. Right now, I have 838 cards, 575 of which are mature, which means that Anki thinks that I know them fairly well. I averaged about 20 to 30 minutes a day with kind of a lull mid-month. I was doing 150 reviews a day early in the month and about 200 reviews a day later in the month, right after I added some new cards, and I also changed how often I would see new flashcards. So instead of doing, instead of seeing the card after 1 day, 2 days after that, 5 days after that, I changed it so I would see the card 1 day, the next day, the day after that, and then 2 days, and then 5 days after that. And the idea was to make the cards easier by increasing exposure, and also as a side effect by making them easier, reducing the stress in doing reviews. So it's interesting to note that despite doing 30% more reviews, 200 versus 150, I was actually spending less time studying. So I think it was a success. And I do want to also, I want to add a lot more cards soon. I haven't added any in probably a couple weeks now. Something that has become apparent to me the more I do these flashcards is that words that I've learned in complete isolation just don't stick. So when I first started, I looked at a list, top 200 Vietnamese words, and I just put those cards in. Okay, this word means blue. This word means police officer. This word means hat. These are specifically like words that are not included in any other phrases or any other sentences in my deck. They just don't stick. I'm still forgetting them after 60 days, and double or triple the number of reviews when compared to other cards. There just isn't enough context for them to stick in my head. And so ultimately, I've found these cards to be a waste of time, frustrating, and demotivating. So I've just been deleting them in favor of cards that, phrases, sentences, or words that are contained in those phrases and sentences. As far as these words, these flashcards, their transfer to like real understanding, it's not one-to-one at all. It's kind of, I think of it as like a blueprint, in my head, so that when my brain kind of catches up and like learns to really hear and recognize that word, it has an idea of what it means. It's kind of a roadmap for later, especially in the beginning. Early on, it was taking me a really long time to hear these words that were in my flashcards in real videos, up to like 30 days. But as my foundation has gotten stronger, as my knowledge of Vietnamese has grown, I feel like that gap is shrinking. The last thing that I want to note is that specifically for Anki, I don't actually think the buttons, the again, hard, good, easy buttons, I don't think they offer particularly great choices for like, for these cards. I don't feel like it really changes the intervals in the right way. I think there's a lot of optimization to be done there, but I'm not really holding my breath for Anki to change them anytime soon. It's just a note. So moving on to minimal pairs, I feel like they're kind of related to flashcards, but I have been doing more minimal pair training. So minimal pairs are words that differ by only one sound. Basically, I see on the screen two words, and I hear only one of them, and I have to decide which one that I heard. I do think this process has been helping my comprehension, and I also think that in the future, it will improve my pronunciation because I have a better understanding of what the real differences between these sounds are. I'm excited to talk about it in detail in the future, but I want to kind of flesh things out a little bit more before I dive deep into it. For now, I just wanted to mention that I am practicing them, and I do think they are helping. Okay, dictionaries. So in my last video, I had recommended this Tuttle dictionary, but I have quickly started to find its limitations. It's nice for basic words, and I really do still enjoy flipping through it to find definitions. I prefer it to typing them, but there's just doesn't have enough in here. So I've started using some online dictionaries, but they're not really all that great either, especially since they all use nearly identical databases. But vdict.co and tratu.coviet.vn both seem to use the same database, that has more entries. So I've started to use those websites if the Tuttle book doesn't have the definition that I'm looking for. If it just doesn't make sense, the definition that's in here, I'll look further. Those website interfaces aren't spectacular, but they're usable. Really, I'm waiting for the day that I can understand this Vietnamese dictionary, because I think it's way better than anything that uses two languages, but I'm just not there yet. Okay, so moving on to, again, what may be the most important part of this video. This month was really difficult in terms of motivation and doubts. I felt, whether it was true or not, I felt that I was progressing really slowly, or maybe not at all. Like by day 50, like I still couldn't understand like a single complete sentence at all. And I was still really only hearing a few words here and there. So especially during the middle 10 or 12 days of the month, this lack of like visible progress led to a lot of doubts, and it definitely affected my studies. For instance, my mind would wander while I was watching videos. I kept wanting to like check my phone, or I was even considering like using classic textbook style studying for a while, despite me having a strong belief that like textbooks aren't that effective. So I think some of these feelings came from the rapid improvement that I saw in month one and the expectations that created. I went from knowing nothing to comparatively knowing a lot. I felt that if I could keep progressing at that rate, I would be fluent in no time. But by day 35, I was already waiting for like the floodgates to open and for just like huge chunks of Vietnamese for me to just like my brain to understand it. And those gates obviously like still haven't opened. Logically, I knew better, but I still felt that way. So like, I think another way to think about what was happening is that, when you go to 0 to 1, that's a massive improvement. You go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, those are still huge improvements. But you go from 100 to 101, after a month or so, you're going from 100 to 101, or 101 to 102. It's the same improvement, but it doesn't feel that way. It's much harder to notice. So I think my expectations were not properly adjusted moving into month 2. And I think another thing that contributed to this month being tough is the method itself. It takes faith to keep banging your head against videos that you can't understand, with the hope that, you'll just kind of magically, in a way, get better through some unknown process, your brain working things out in the background. It takes faith to do that. And even though this is a method that has worked for many people and produces, in my opinion, results that surpass any other method, one still can't help but wonder if you're really learning, when you're not understanding anything. Maybe you're not doing it quite right. But I pushed through my doubts and I stuck to the plan, which resulted in the progress that I was hoping for. By around day 53, I heard what I think was my first full sentence. It was a small win, and it helped boost my motivation a little bit. And by around day 60, despite struggling for most of the month, I felt like I was hearing more groups of words and sometimes even full sentences. So compared to day 31, I think I've improved a lot. And I just need to kind of keep the faith, stick with it, push through, be diligent. And so, I'm really hoping that one day these videos can help others who find themselves in a similar situation, doubting themselves and the process, to push through and to be able to reach their goals. One thing to note is I do feel like I could make a lot more progress if I read more. But this is kind of against the philosophy that I'm working with. I feel like if I read a lot, books, textbooks, whatever, that I would make rapid, short-term improvements and learn a lot of new vocabulary, but I fear that I would be locking in parts of my auditory understanding, my accent, my innate knowledge of the tones, which I'm learning right now, they're not in English, possibly even locking in some grammar if I spent too much time with the kind of contrived grammar that they focus on in textbooks and not real native books. But I'm going to continue to stick with more auditory stuff and read later on. That was month 2. Overall, it was a little bit tough, but it turned out well, and I'm really happy with how things are going. If anyone has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again in another month.